So for today's session, I'll start off with an overview just of the role, some of the more dry stuff, a little bit of the overview of NAFLT responsibilities and the application process. And then for the second half, you'll hear less from me and more from our lovely panelists, a bit about their experience in the role so far, and have an opportunity to ask any questions that you have. So first, let's just review the NAFLT application a bit. So I know that all of you have prior experience with leadership roles, so I'm not going to go into this with a great degree of detail because it's going to be pretty similar to the experience that you've had applying to either HAF or AFLT in the past. But NAFLT is a bit different from our other MAT leadership roles in that it's only open to students that have had a prior leadership role, since you're really taking on the position of peer mentor to HAFs and AFLT. So I think it's a really awesome opportunity for all of you to leverage what worked great in your leadership experience and also reflect on maybe things that you didn't like, that left you wanting something different or wanting a different experience, and being able to really share those best practices and sometimes some pitfalls with a new generation of leaders. So I think I love the NAFLT role. I think it occupies a really, really unique position in all of the wider Matriculate ecosystem. So I'm really excited to talk about it today. So that's the eligibility. And also it's only a year long, so it's open to seniors as well, as opposed to HAF, which I think is really nice. And then the application. So we do have a universal application across all of our leadership roles. So if you're maybe interested in multiple, maybe HAF or NAFLT as well, or returning as AFLT, I really encourage you to apply to all of them. I think going through the application process, doing the performance tasks, and having an interview can really help students determine what specific role is the most aligned with your professional goals and your personal goals. So the same as we had last year, it's another universal application again this year. So if you're not sure, I encourage you to apply and then kind of figure out from there what position is the best fit for you. And then thirdly, we'll have a performance task. So this will really be based on scenarios that we have seen in the NAFLT role thus far. We had all of our NAFLT members from 2022 give feedback on the application questions and the performance task this year, which was great to make sure that it felt reflective of their experience and felt authentic. And so the one thing I do always like to flag with our performance tasks is that when we say spend no more than an hour, we really mean that. I think sometimes students spend hours and hours and they start it and then they go back to it. There's really no one right answer we're looking for. It's really just an opportunity to get a greater sense of how you think and how you would approach the role, and for you to reflect on, oh, if this is an NAFLT situation, does this sound like, something that is actually aligned with what I want and what I'm interested in. And then lastly, you'll have your interview that will be with either me or with Patrick. And it will just be really an opportunity to connect more about the role, have you elaborate on your application responses, your performance task, all that good stuff. And as a reminder, the application deadline is coming up on March 28th. So I'll pause there if anybody has any questions about the application process, the performance task, any of that stuff. We're good? We're chilling? Great. Cool. So what do we look for in our leaders? This is also probably going to look familiar to all of you, because this is the same list of leadership skills that we use to evaluate students who are applying to any of our leadership roles. So we used it last year for all of you when you applied to HAF, AFLT, or NAFLT. So we're still operating under that same framework. So really honing in on leadership skills, organizational skills, and interpersonal skills. But I also really want to emphasize the idea of skill potential here, because I think sometimes seeing this list can be, create an unnecessary barrier and create a lot of unnecessary anxiety for students, and honestly for staff too, if I'm going to be real. And just emphasize that, one of my favorite parts of working with leadership is seeing students grow their skills, grow their confidence, helping me grow my skills as a manager. So if these look like things you're passionate about, that you have a strong foundation for, and you want to really hone in on, that's what we want. Not to be an expert in everything, because That's perfectionism, and that is not what we want to be promoting here. So now I'd love to pivot to our students and ask any of our current NAFLT members if you either have a skill that you feel like, wow, this is like a linchpin, this is a key to the NAFLT role to being successful, or if you feel like, wow, this is a skill that I really wasn't confident on when I joined, and now I've had an opportunity to really, really grow and develop throughout my position.
I can start us off. I think one thing, I don't know where it would fall under these three, but a huge thing has been analysis. And like not just talking with your HAF that you're mentoring and like really analyzing in between the lines of like what's going on and where they actually need support, but also now in our independent projects, we're doing a lot of like gap analysis and seeing like where do we need to improve, what is actually going on. So that's a huge one.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, I think for me, a big skill that I was able to practice in this role was kind of advocating for both myself and also just kind of projects and initiatives that I believe in. So throughout the projects that I've done, I've focused a lot on DI work. And that's something that I really have not had a lot of experience in, but something that I was really passionate about and really wanted to learn more. And so just being able to really be a self-starter. I think you have a lot of that practice as an HAF, but in the way that the HIF role and AFLT role is structured, you're falling under like certain buckets. So there's not too much room for you to play around with it. Whereas in the NAFLT role, I think you really take charge and make it your own. And just having that ability to really advocate for the projects that I want to do, for the things that I want to try out, the things that I want to learn has been a really big learning experience.
And I would say my skill, kind of similar to Jess's, is just learning how to like speak up and be in tune with your own needs and abilities, like in a paraprofessional environment, because you have a lot of freedom and flexibility with things that you can take on in the NAFLT role. And there's a lot of room for you to kind of, again, be a self-starter and do what you're interested in. But you can't do everything. And so just being able to voice your needs and communicate what you can and can't do has been a huge area of growth for me, I think.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing that. Really appreciate your perspectives. And just, emphasizing that everybody has the opportunity to, tailor their role to the skills that they're most hoping to work on, and that, it is a growth process for everybody along the journey. So I really appreciate that. Cool. So now a little bit more about the role itself. So I kind of think of the NAFLT term divided into 3 chunks. And also for Brian, Justin, Dylan, if you feel like there's things that I'm missing here when I go over this, feel free to just kind of jump in and highlight anything else. So in the fall, the focus is really on the recruitment lead work. So NAFLT are paired with one of Matriculate's partner campuses and will be supporting HAFs and AFLT pretty intensely throughout the recruitment process. So that includes meeting with HAFs for weekly one-on-ones, providing a lot of feedback on campus weekly recruitment plans, maybe campus social media posts, emails that are going out, really supporting them, quality checking their content, creating space for collaborative brainstorming, and also helping HAFs hone their AFLT management skills, all that type of stuff. Another part of that is adding capacity with some advising fellow candidates. So NAFLT will be reviewing rejected AF candidates at the application stage, just to ensure, that we're promoting equity there, that people are not getting rejected too early in the process, supporting that. We'll also be having weekly NAFLT meetings. So a lot of that is working on like collective national recruitment strategy. So kind of talking about the trends that we see. Maybe we see that a lot of HAFs are really confused using Airtable, for example, and that's coming up in a lot of one-on-ones across NAFLT, as well as myself and Patrick. So we'll kind of, it's a really great opportunity to surface like common pain points and problems and brainstorm solutions that can help recruitment run more smoothly at individual campuses, but also collectively. So that's one of my favorite parts, is really coming together as a team and putting all of our collective skills together. Additionally, there's also recruitment projects. So this year, NAFLT worked on our weekly recruitment updates, each member of the NAFLT owning a different section. So providing some, Brian worked on some awesome social media templates and resources that students can use. Jess, as she mentioned before, worked on DEI data. Calvin, who's not here tonight, worked on recruitment data, so our progress against our recruitment goals. And then Dylan worked on some resources to engage the senior AF cohort. So those are just some example recruitment projects. Then during the winter, there's some support with AF training. Obviously this year, with training being virtual, that looked a bit different in the sense that there wasn't the opportunity, unfortunately, for NAFLT to travel to on-campus training. So that's something that we would hope to offer in the future if we're able to pivot back to on-campus trainings. So an opportunity for you to attend the training of the campus that you're working with, support staff with facilitation, logistics, all that stuff. So that's kind of to come. Who knows what will happen next year, but that's definitely on the table for sure. And in addition to that, some recording and consolidating recruitment content and supporting us in the pivot from AF recruitment to AF training. In addition, you'll also help your HAF transition away from working with the recruitment staff and working with their campus lead. So NAFLT had the opportunity to meet with campus leads over the winter, share some of the professional development skills they had been working on with their HAFs, and just kind of ensure like a smoother management transition from the recruitment NAFLT team to the campus lead side of things. And then now the phase that we're in now is really focused a lot less on program implementation and a lot more on program design, which I think is really fun and something that you don't necessarily get as much insight into in Matriculate's other leadership roles. So in addition to providing some capacity for AF certification, the main kind of portion of the role is really working on program design projects. So really doing some macro scale analysis of how the recruitment and training cycle went and coming up with some really concrete next steps, resources, and plans that we can use in order to improve the program for next year. So this morning, actually, we have our NAFLT meetings on Thursday mornings. We did a collaborative working session. So every member of the NAFLT had 20 minutes to present the project that they're currently working on and gather some collective input. And then from there, we're going to come up with some program recommendations and make some shifts in the way we do things for next year. So if you're really interested in kind of shaping the trajectory of Matriculate's like national growth, I think it's a really cool opportunity. And we'll get more in a couple minutes. Brian, Jess, and Dylan will be able to tell you a bit more about their projects, so you'll kind of get a better sense of what those look like. I'll pause there if anybody has any questions about how this term looks, or if NAFLT, if there are things that you did that I forgot to mention, you can feel free to add that in too. Cool. Okay, so now responsibility. So I think I got to a bit of that in the prior slide, so I'm not going to dig in too deep, but I kind of divided the role into these four main responsibility buckets, so to speak, that I saw. So the first is that recruitment lead work. I think that takes a good amount of time in the fall. I would say that's really the primary responsibility in the like late summer post-training months, all the way through the final application deadline in late October, let's say. So again, providing weekly support to your HAFs, conducting those one-on-ones, providing feedback to your team, also, you know, just providing like support, best practices from your experience and helping them build confidence as well, I think is just as important as like actual recruitment progress and a huge part of the role. Next, we have recruitment and certification support. So a lot of that is pretty similar to some of the tasks that you've already done as an HAF or AFLT, just really adding that capacity so that hopefully nobody's workload becomes too overwhelming, and we're able to keep the ACE ratio relatively reasonable. So adding in some ACEs where needed, adding in some AF application reviews where needed, and also new for this year, conducting some AFLT interviews, reviewing AFLT applications, and helping select the next leadership class. So if that's something you're interested in, that's also a new thing we're adding this year. Then those recruitment special projects that I mentioned. So an opportunity to be like less granular with your specific campus, focus more on program-wide recruitment efforts and strategies and resources, and also hopefully creating things that we can use, for multiple years. So when Dylan did NAFLT last year, he ended up pulling together a bunch of recruitment resources into a resource base. So that was kind of a design, but also recruitment project, and that base is still something that we use this year and will continue to use and update. And then the last piece, which is what we're working on now, program design projects. So really giving you an opportunity to improve Matriculate's program quality, make recommendations. It's also, I think, the least directive element of the NAFLT role. So if students come in, with an idea that they're really passionate about, that's one of my favorite parts of having a smaller group. We're very open to tailoring the project to what your passions are. We don't want to just assign you a project that you'll be working on for months that isn't, genuinely exciting to you. So I think that is a real opportunity to specialize in, your skill set and your goals. And now some support. So we have, as I mentioned, team meetings. Those happen on a weekly basis in the fall and now in the spring, because our work is a bit more individual. We are doing bi-weekly team meetings and bi-weekly one-on-one check-ins. We also have office hours with Matriculate staff, opportunities for professional development. A lot of the other support is pretty similar to what you get as an HAF or AFLT in terms of staff relationship. But I think that sort of meeting structure of weekly team meetings as well as individual check-ins is important to highlight, because it's a bit different than what you've experienced as HAF or AFLT. Does anybody have questions about those responsibility buckets or about some of the resources? Awesome. So now less of me and more of the NAFLT. So I feel like it would be nice to see everybody's faces. So I think I'm going to stop the screen share. The panel is going to be NAFLT experience. So we're really just going to kind of ping pong around to Brian, Jess, and Dylan. But if you have any questions that aren't covered here, please unmute yourselves, use the chat, because this is really for everybody on this call to get a greater sense of the role. So absolutely don't be shy. So first question I'd love to hear about for our current members. What drew you to apply to the role, and a little bit of an extension of what we spoke about before. What specific skills or qualities do you feel have been really essential to your success in the role thus far? Now, not all at once.
I can go. I think, well, one thing is I didn't apply for the NAFLT role, so that is like one caveat. My experience in the NAFLT role has been a little unique, because I was in the position the first year that it existed, and the first year that it existed, it looked completely different from what it is now. But I applied for AFLT, and then Patrick was like, hey, we've got this other position that we're thinking about doing. Do you want to hear more? And then hearing more was getting the offer. But anyway, in terms of skills and qualities that I've used so far, I think that pretty much every leadership skill that was in the slide earlier is applicable to this role, like Juliana said, but some that come to mind are clear, proactive communication skills, organization and time management, management skills as a recruitment lead, being able to walk that line between peer and like being a peer mentor, so between being a peer and like someone who's giving feedback and providing guidance and leadership, and relationship building a like rapport with your HAFs. Yeah. I think, yeah, that's all I've got.
Yeah. Thanks, Dylan. Very helpful. Yeah, I think that the interpersonal elements of this role, I think, are not always captured, but I think that just like building trust the same way that you would build with your own leadership team on your campus, like building trust with your HAFs and AFLT so they feel like they can come to you with challenges, with difficulties they're facing, is something that this group has done so well, and I think is hopefully one of the rewarding parts of the role as well. Yeah, so Jess and Brian, if you have anything to add on that, feel free. Otherwise, that could be a really good transition. I'd love to hear you all kind of speak about what your experience was as a recruitment lead, what about it you enjoyed, what were some issues that you faced, some troubleshooting that happened, and just kind of talk about your recruitment lead journey.
Yeah, I'll start off. I think my experience as a recruitment lead was really cool. I think just because of the old application, we thought like coming into it, I was like, okay, I'm gonna help build this cohort, and we ended up pairing with like very established cohorts. And so instead of like trying to fulfill your vision, it was a lot of understanding the wants and desires of what kind of community that HAF is going to build. And so it is like a whole different frame that I've never really worked with, of just like managing that and empowering in a very different way than as HAF or AFLT. Yeah, not like I was surrendering my ideals, but I was like, okay, this is their vision, and so I'm going to help build that. And then I think like the most rewarding part was seeing my HAF kind of grow and develop from like where he was in the summer to where they were like by October, and just like having so much more confidence and having so much like more systems management and capabilities and all these things that they weren't before. And then I think the most challenging part was stepping back and realizing you're not staff, and so you're kind of in that weird part of like you can't answer every question, and especially some questions are like so big, maybe you get into some drama and it's like out of your control, and then it's like you can't handle that, but you also have to like calm them down, get them through stuff, and still get your work done. So I think that's a huge balancing act, and that was the most challenging.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I do think that the kind of management triangle between like the HAFs, AFLT, and AFLT and staff, maybe it's more of a square, is really something that we all worked on and had to, intentionally develop a rhythm on, because there are moments where, students might have questions that need to come directly to staff, or even if they don't need to come directly to staff, that's the perception. So there's a lot of kind of, management chain. So that I really appreciate that, Brian. Jess or Dylan, anything to add there from your experience?
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with everything that Brian said. And I think also when you're working as a recruitment lead, um, it requires you often to like think back on when you were like on a leadership team. Like for me, I was an HAF for the 2020 cohort, so I had been like 2 years since I recruited. And so I really had to take some time to like think back on like how I felt when I was in their shoes and really relate to that. And but also recognizing that like recruitment has also changed from year to year, especially given COVID and being online. So really being able to navigate that, and like relate to their experiences and help them out, but also giving them the room to grow and like create their own fellowship and help them kind of create that vision that they want. And I think just like walking that fine line of also like being that peer that they can go to with challenges, but also like respecting that you're managing them and helping them to manage their leadership team and then eventually a cohort. So it's kind of weird to like find where you are in the middle of all that, but definitely also really rewarding to see that like your HAFs grow so much from when they like do training, start with recruitment till the end where they have their cohort and like have something like tangible that they've built.
Yeah, I'll second everything that everybody said, especially the part about it being really rewarding to be a co-creator with your HAFs and their work, and really just helping them figure out what their vision is and helping them execute that. I would say just like the most rewarding part of recruitment, being a recruitment lead for me, was like being able to celebrate milestones with my HAFs, like when past the early deadline, like when they had like met their goals and had been so stressed and nervous before, and I was like, see guys, it worked out fine, like you did great, like let it and celebrating that, and similarly celebrating at the end of recruitment and just getting to like de-stress and like take a deep breath with them and celebrate their accomplishments. That was really rewarding and really fun.
Awesome. Yes, the best part of recruitment is often being done with recruitment. Cool. Does anybody have questions about like the recruitment lead side of things or anything that folks have said so far? Yeah.
I know that some NAFLT members work with their campuses that they helped recruit from, and I know that some like help recruit campuses that are totally out of like, you know, the sphere of where they go to school. I'm just wondering if y'all could kind of help orient me with that experience. And I just feel, I think everyone feels this way, but like your experience with your undergraduate college is like, so you feel like you know the ins and outs and everything. And I'm wondering how being a manager for a school that you might know less about than your HAF team, like how that went and what you would advise in that process.
Yeah, I'll defer to all of you for the second part of that question, but for the first part of that question, I just want to maybe provide a little bit of context about how the like NAFLT assignments are made. So 2 years ago, when Dylan was in NAFLT, our inaugural year, we paired students with new campuses. And then after kind of reflecting on some of the challenges, Patrick and I decided that that wasn't really necessarily the best structure, in the sense that, you know, it's a really steep learning curve with new campuses, and we felt like it made more sense to pair those with full-time staff just because we have a bit more time to focus on those new campuses, given that, you know, often it's just a really, really difficult. And that pairing NAFLT with more established campuses would free up more of our time to focus on that, and just be like honestly a better experience for NAFLT, because I think for that first year it was really challenging, and students faced a lot of just like random bureaucratic you know, roadblocks and things. So that's kind of how we got to the structure that we had this year, which was pairing NAFLT with established campuses. So campuses that have worked with Matriculate for multiple years, and students, NAFLT had the opportunity, their preference was, if they were, you know, really passionate about working with their own campus, or if they really wanted to experience something different. And then we took those preferences into account when we made those assignments. So just to say that if any of you feel like, oh, I really want to like continue the legacy I'm building at my school, or if you're like, I'm sick of it, I want something super different, there's room to kind of play around with those preferences there. But I don't know if you all have anything to add, maybe for Brian, because you did work with a different school than your own.
Yeah, I think just I chose to work with another school because I couldn't see myself bringing more innovation as like a founder of my campus, and then the HAF, and then also helping with recruitment the next year. I was like, there's too much Brian at Emory right now, and I need it to be other people because it can't just be Brian's thing. And then I also felt like it was a better opportunity for me to develop by seeing other people's leadership styles. and experiencing like, because Emory is a very different thing. Like the community is very different from other communities. And so I wanted to see what was out there.
Awesome. Did that answer your question, Angie? Cool. Great. Anybody have any other questions about what we've discussed so far? Oh. Never too much, Brian. I agree. Yeah, so our next kind of prompt, there is a lot of independent work with the NAFLT. In the fall, there's a more group collaboration, but at the same point, every campus is different. So, you know, somebody might be struggling with like team communication management, somebody else might really be struggling with just like hitting the recruitment goal. So I think there's a lot of overlap, but there's also a lot of like self-management and independent work that goes into it. So I'd love to hear how all of you have kind of coped with that, found ways that work for you to like manage yourself and stay on track when there's not always as much structure as I think there is with AFLT or HAF.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important skill for me here, and this is definitely something I have grown massively in my 2 years in an AFLT, has been just having the self-awareness to realize when something isn't working. And knowing that, okay, I either like being able to self-diagnose your problems and knowing when, okay, I can work to solve this myself, or knowing when you need to reach out for support and ask for help. And being able to, yeah, like try out different tools and techniques over time, and realize what's working and what isn't.
Awesome.
I think for me, it was just kind of trying to find structure where I can. My personality is very type A, so I just like I need spreadsheets, I need checklists, like I need to have that structure, even if it's not there initially. And so for me, I think what was really helpful was just like giving myself like that allotted time every week to like go through, review what I'm working on, see what needs to be done next. And especially in the beginning of a project, really taking that time out to think through what I need, and all like the different possibilities and outcomes that can happen, just so that I'm mentally prepared for whatever comes down the road. Um, and I think it can be a little bit challenging because like this position is a very like self-starting position, so you're, like I said, advocating for your thoughts, like really trying to figure things out on your own, but also like know that you do have staff support. Like I've reached out to Juliana many times to kind of like rant or just like reach out for help and feedback. So just like know what works for you and reach out for help when you need, and try to find structure where you can so that you're not super overwhelmed by all the tasks that you have.
Yeah, my thing is super easy. Oh, sorry. My thing is super easy. Is I just calculate how many hours I have to do this thing and how long it'll take, and then I'll set that aside. And I think like one thing I didn't know that I would maybe advise is like you're gonna pick up things throughout the year, whether it's like your honors proposal, which like just happened for me, or just too many classes, whatever. And so I think like the role and like the independence kind of part is just like it's tied to how much you can really think about all that at a big picture. And yeah, I don't know if that was helpful or not. I'm just saying you're going to be busier than you think, and it'll still work out if you believe in yourself.
Heck yeah. And again, I said this before, but I think is another really nice thing about a small group. You know, I think it's easier to keep each other apprised of what's going on in students' lives. So there's a bit less flexibility, as you all probably remember, during the recruitment cycle. But like outside of that, with these independent projects, we have some wiggle room to play with timelines, and you know, make it work for everybody with hopefully not too much burnout. So next, I think it would be helpful to hear about your independent projects. Though I already made you do this once this morning, if you could maybe just each give a quick SparkNotes version of just what your project is, either talking about the recruitment project or the spring project, just to get a better sense of like what that is.
I'll start. Mine's the quickest. So I wanted to sort of standardize social media because I think there's a lot of good stuff that every campus does, but also every year leadership fluctuates so much in their quality. And so I'm building this like Airtable base and also a playbook that'll teach like basics of design. It backlogs every design that's been made this year, and then it includes an editable template so you can make copies of whatever campus you want. A lot of sustainability stuff, because that's kind of what has been missing for a while, and just no one's had the time to do it. And so I was like, cool, I'll do it.
You two want to go together, seeing as you're working collaboratively? You want me to say?
Yeah, I was like waiting for Dylan because I didn't want to cut him off or anything. But I can share a little bit about what we're working on for this spring. So right now we're holding focus groups with 2022 leadership, just to kind of take a deeper dive into some of the focus areas that we've noticed through the recruitment survey. So right now we're trying to get more insight about kind of time expectations and communication with staff, as well as AF skill development in the leadership role. And at the end, we're hoping to kind of create and identify some like actionable next steps for staff to take in order to improve the leadership experience, just because there's always things we can improve on, and there's always a lot going on with recruitment. So yeah, so that's what we've been working on.
Thanks, Jess. And the thing that I'll add, and I think we've talked about this a little bit already, is just that one thing that's really cool about these projects is that there's a lot of room for self-direction. So one thing I've really loved about doing this focus groups project is, I mean, we got to choose like focus groups. That's what we want to do in the first place. But then even when we chose focus groups, like we pretty much completely created the agenda, the questions that we wanted to ask, the areas we wanted to dive into, like what felt important and meaningful to us. Like we created that agenda. And so it's been really rewarding and cool to have created this agenda and then be like executing that by having the focus groups and talking to leaders and getting their perspectives and really getting to see this thing come together. So yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And then I'll just speak to Calvin's project just because that's the other project. He worked on data analysis, kind of continuing his work in the fall, looking at a lot of the trends in recruitment data, both in terms of the number of students that we reached, comparing like, you know, just the number of students we reached compared to prior years at different campuses, also doing a lot with different demographics. So gender demographics, racial demographics, income demographics, just summarizing a lot of that data, as well as looking at some interpretations and trends. So areas where we could still grow, where we could, you know, further diversify the students we're reaching out to, campuses that we've maybe had persistent challenges reaching the number of students we'd hope to reach every year. So he has compiled a really thorough and awesome data report, both like summarizing the findings and giving some interpretations. So I think that will be really helpful, both like internally for staff and externally. Yeah, so with our last 15 minutes, we can go through, I think we could go through the application process a bit, but I also think I'd really like to mainly focus on, for the students that are here, we can address these questions if that's helpful, but I'd first and foremost love to hear any questions that you have, any uncertainties about what the role looks like, advice you might want to get from our NAFLT. I'd love to start there. Yeah, go Angie.
Okay, sorry, I don't want to take up too much space, but with the fall, not like every school is different on their like what's happening in their fall procedures, and I'm sure you guys got a lot of experience with helping navigate your HAF teams through like chaotic college messaging about like what's happening and how to gauge and how to like adapt your recruitment strategy on the fly. I'm wondering if you guys want to talk about that process. And like, again, I know you guys, Brian mentioned this earlier, it's really hard to not be too hands-on just because we've all done this before. I'm wondering how you like balance both like trying to steer people in the right direction when we have such little information about like if we actually have to do digital recruitment or like in-person recruitment, but also just allowing people to figure out their own management styles and like really owning their own process.
Yeah, I can share a little bit about kind of walking the Princeton team through the recruitment process this year. So Princeton we rely a lot on in-person tabling for recruitment. And so it's actually kind of tough to kind of transition it online just because, like I said, we recruit a lot of our applicants through in-person strategies. And so this year, I think in order to move everything to an online version, um, I kind of entered almost like with like a blank slate. Like I knew the things I wanted to bring up to the HAFs, but I first and foremost prioritized getting their perspectives and their thoughts because they were very proactive with their AFLT as well to really come up with a solid plan. So I kind of went in just like hearing their thoughts, trying to see what they have, and then fill in holes as needed. And I think with online recruitment, they focused a lot on individual outreach. And so they had like a bunch of spreadsheets tracking who is texting who, emailing who. And I think that was really helpful just because I was able to like kind of force myself to take a step back without intruding too much and allowing them to really take control of the wheel. And I think like in my experience as a recruitment lead, I kind of saw my role as like the like driving teacher, like they're at the wheel and they're like taking front. But if something happens where I need to intervene, I'm there to step in and do so. And I think that was really helpful just to like set those boundaries and also just being very like transparent and honest with your HAF and then AFLT that like you're there for support, but this is still like their cohort and their team, and that they should feel comfortable to try out new things and take initiative as needed.
Awesome.
Yeah, on the flip side, since I had no idea how like Williams did recruitment, and so I don't know if you guys table a lot because I know Emory does. I think the big thing for me was using more skills that you learn as an advising fellow than I did as a HAF, because a lot of it is like asking the right questions and asking like using close-ended questions when you need to, open-ended questions when you need to, leading questions if they're like maybe going down the wrong path. Like my HAF was so hands-on. I was always scared he was going to get burnt out because he was like doing so much work and not like delegating as much. And so we had to like talk about that. And that was something where it was like, you just kind of had to see that that was their leadership style and see like pros and cons and kind of step in when you need to. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, in terms of navigating like chaotic messaging from like colleges, and Yale's messaging was actually pretty all right, I think. So that wasn't like a challenge that we encountered, but in terms of just kind of navigating that space where you're a like where you're helping your HAFs execute their vision, I like tried like from the beginning, from our first meeting, to establish like a values-based relationship with my HAF. So our first one-on-one, I was like, these are the values that I want to have for our relationship. And, you know, invited them to add anything they wanted to those. And like, I don't remember like exactly what they were, but one of them I think was like clear and open communication. And also like, if you don't like the way that I'm managing you, please tell me because I want this to be for you. Things like that. And when And really just having it be a collaborative relationship all the way through. So every one-on-one, the agendas were just Google Docs that had like a very kind of a bare bones outline, but before every agenda, like I wanted them to add what they wanted to work on that meeting to the agenda like 24 hours in advance. And then I would go to it and look through it and come with what support I could. And then in terms of like actually guiding recruitment strategies, just really letting them try kind of any idea that they wanted to. And then when they tried an idea, looking at what the results from that idea were, and saying like, okay, this worked. Let's think about why it worked and how we can act on that information, or this didn't work. So let's think about why it didn't work, and how we can act on that. And kind of walking them through that process. And then when they were running out of ideas, if they were, giving them new ideas to try and continuing to walk through that process every time. Yeah, I hope that was helpful.
Awesome. Any other questions that folks have or things you're sitting with? Yeah.
I had a question about sort of coming up with your project. Do you sort of like need to know right away what your project is going to be, or is it something that kind of like develops? Yeah.
I can speak to the staff end before we have the NAFLT side of things. From a staff perspective, it's kind of a hybrid of the two. So Patrick and I sort of came together and came up with a list of things that we know that we need to work on, that we'll be, owning and managing throughout the next couple of months, whether that's recruitment projects or now kind of that program design stuff. So, we have a list of things that we know. For example, Calvin's project, his kind of macro scale data look back, that's something that's happened every year. Patrick managed it 2 years ago. I managed it last year. So that's something that needs to happen, and that happens every year. Whereas taking Brian's social media base, for example, that has certainly never happened from a staff end. So we kind of come up with our list and present that. And if students, if they see a project that they are excited about on that list, that's great. And then we can kind of modify it and take it from there. But then students also have some opportunity to present an idea of their own. But I'd love to hear from y'all how you kind of came up with your ideas.
I hate taking up so much space, but I'll quickly say that I've looked at it more as like, what skills do I want to develop? And mine was like building a system and sort of like crafting language that can be used at a wide scale. And then based on that, I think Julianne and I together kind of came up with like the actual like how that's going to be applied. And so, yeah, I looked at it a little differently.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it, thinking about what you want to get out of this role. That's one of my big passions. I don't always hit the mark, to be sure, but making sure that, this is a like robust learning process for all of you, and that you're able to walk away feeling like you've completed things that, you're proud of or you're excited about. Yeah, so on a practical note, the application is due on March 28th. I also should mention, since I don't think I mentioned this with the initial rollout of the role, that the time commitment is about 8 to 10 hours per week. I think like our other roles, there's some fluctuation there. I would guess that in recruitment, it's more on that 8 to 10 hours a week side, sometimes even a bit more, which we will always talk about and try to get it down into that under the max. And then I think in the spring, it's a bit more loose, because it's a lot more self-guided just when you have time to work on your project. The NAFLT also is a stipended role, so it's a $1,400 stipend, paid once in the fall and then once in the spring. So just getting that, details out there. And in our last couple of minutes, if anybody has any other questions for these panelists here, things that are still on your mind, feedback for how we could have improved this info session. Otherwise, you can head on your way. Awesome.
Thank you guys so much. Have a good weekend.
Yeah, thank you all. And if any of you have individual questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to chat. And I'd love to see you all apply. I'd love to work with you all again.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Thanks, everyone.